One evening, the owner of a famous restaurant chain walked into one of his own restaurants, but not as the wealthy businessman everyone knew. Dressed in worn-out clothes, he wanted to see how his staff treated ordinary customers. But what happened next shocked him. Stay tuned until the end. You won't believe what happens next. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. Jonathan Hayes stepped into La Verona. No suit, no polished shoes, just worn-out jeans, a faded jacket, scuffed sneakers, a cap pulled low over his forehead, and a face no one would recognize. He looked like someone who didn't belong. But this wasn't just any man. He owned the place. For weeks he'd been hearing complaints, rude staff, unfair treatment, a manager who only cared about the wealthy. Customers were ignored unless they looked like they had money. The working-class folks were treated like a burden. Employees who once took pride in their service now followed the toxic culture of favoritism. Jonathan had built his empire from nothing. He started with a tiny food stall, working long nights, pushing through failures, and treating every customer like they mattered. That's how he turned La Verona into a chain of elite restaurants. But now that vision was being tainted. Tonight, he wasn't stepping in as the owner. He was here as a test. He pushed the door open and walked inside. No greeting, no acknowledgement. The hostess stood at the podium, her eyes scanning him for a second before looking past him, like he was invisible. A wealthy couple entered behind him, dressed in designer clothes. Her whole demeanor changed. She smiled brightly, greeting them as if they were royalty. Jonathan glanced around. Waiters moved swiftly between tables, their postures straight, their attention focused on well-dressed customers. Not a single one looked his way. He cleared his throat. Nothing. A moment passed. Then another. Jonathan sighed. So, the rumors were true. Instead of making a scene, he quietly walked to a small corner table and sat down. His fingers tapped against the wooden surface. Now it was time to see just how bad things had gotten. He waited. And waited. 15 minutes passed. Not a single waiter approached. Finally, he lifted a hand, signaling for service. That's when Mark, the restaurant's manager, noticed him. Mark was in his mid-40s, dressed sharply, but his smirk carried an air of superiority. He was the type who judged people not by their character, but by their appearance and wealth. Mark strode over to Jonathan's table, arms crossed. "Sir, I think you might be in the wrong place." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "I was hoping to order dinner." Mark chuckled. "Oh? Do you know how expensive this place is?" He eyed Jonathan's clothes with obvious amusement. "Our cheapest meal costs more than what you're wearing." Jonathan remained calm. "I'd like the steak and a glass of fresh juice." Mark snorted. "Right. And I'd like a private jet." He sighed dramatically. "Listen, old man, I don't want to waste my staff's time. This isn't a soup kitchen." Nearby customers chuckled, entertained by the humiliation. Jonathan reached into his pocket and placed a black card on the table, the kind of card that only the wealthiest people carried. Mark's smirk faltered for a moment. Then he scoffed. "Nice prop. Where'd you steal it from?" Jonathan exhaled slowly. "I'd still like my order." Mark rolled his eyes and snapped his fingers at a waiter. "Give him whatever's cheapest, and make it quick." The waiter hesitated but nodded. Jonathan watched as Mark strutted away, laughing under his breath. He had just humiliated his own boss, and he had no idea. When the food arrived, it wasn't what Jonathan had ordered. Instead of a fine steak, he received a plate of cold bread and a tiny bowl of soup. Jonathan took a bite. Bland, carelessly made, an insult on a plate. But he remained calm, observing. Across the room, Mark was entertaining wealthy guests, laughing loudly, ensuring their meals were perfect. He greeted them with warmth, a warmth he had denied Jonathan. Then the restaurant doors swung open. A sharply dressed man in a tailored suit entered, Mr. Sinclair, the regional director of the restaurant chain. The moment Mark saw him, his smug expression disappeared. He rushed forward with enthusiasm. "Sir, what a wonderful surprise! Please have a seat. We'll bring you our best fresh juice." Sinclair didn't respond. Instead, he walked past Mark, straight toward Jonathan. Mark blinked in confusion. "Sir," Sinclair said, his voice full of respect, "we weren't expecting you tonight." The restaurant fell into stunned silence. Mark's smirk was gone. His face paled. The customers who had laughed at Jonathan stopped mid-bite. Jonathan finally put down his fork. "I wanted to see how my customers are treated when no one knows who I am." A heavy silence filled the air. Mark's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Sir, I didn't know." Jonathan leaned back, his eyes piercing. Would it have made a difference? Mark felt his knees go weak. His usual arrogance crumbled into fear. I... Jonathan shook his head. "You judged me based on my clothes. You assumed my worth based on appearances. Is this how you treat people when you think they're beneath you?" The employees lowered their heads, ashamed. Mark stammered, "Sir, please, You were just humiliating someone you thought was poor," Jonathan finished for him. Mark's face burned red. I can change. I swear." Jonathan sighed. "You've had 5 years to change." Mark froze. Then came the words that sent a shockwave through the entire restaurant. "You're fired." A collective gasp rippled through the staff. Some looked relieved. Others exchanged nervous glances. Mark staggered backward, his world crumbling. "Sir, please, I need this job." Jonathan's voice was calm but firm. "Then you should have treated people better." Mark stood frozen, realizing there was no escape. His head lowered. He slowly turned and walked toward the exit, humiliated in the same way he had humiliated others. Jonathan turned to James, the young waiter who had hesitated earlier. "You wanted to serve me, didn't you?" James gulped. "Yes, sir. But Mark..." "I saw." Jonathan studied him before asking, "How would you like to be the new manager?" James's eyes widened. "Me?" Jonathan smiled. "You showed kindness even when it wasn't easy. That's the kind of leadership we need." A murmur spread through the staff, one of hope. James stood tall. "I won't let you down, sir." Jonathan nodded. "I know you won't." He turned to the rest of the staff. "Let this be a lesson. No one, no matter how rich or poor, deserves to be looked down upon. This restaurant isn't just about fine dining. It's about respect." As the words sank in, a sense of renewal washed over the room. People straightened their backs, ready to make a change. And as Jonathan finally received his steak, the restaurant felt different. Because from that day on, things would never be the same again. True character is revealed in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. Respect, kindness, and humility should not be reserved for the wealthy or well-dressed, but extended to everyone, regardless of their status or appearance. Power and success do not define a person, integrity does. Those who judge others unfairly often find themselves facing the consequences of their actions. In the end, it's not wealth or status that earns true respect, but the way we treat others. What do you think about this story? Have you ever seen someone being treated unfairly because of their appearance? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe everyone deserves respect no matter who they are, hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories. See you in the next one.